Hello, my name is Michael Swinford. I'd like to welcome you today to this edition of the Veteran Voice. With us today we have a service officer that serves Western Kentucky area, and we'll be talking about disabilities, pensions, compensation, and other issues which will be very important to the veteran and his family. We'll be right back after this. Ron, thank you for coming by today. I know you're a busy man, but we have a lot of people in the audience out there that they worry about the VA system and all of this. So let's explore today what the system means and how we can get into the system and work it. If I were in the military and I was going to get out in about 4 months, how would I find you? How would I know about you?
On the internet, the state of Kentucky has a site. The address of it is www.veterans.ky.gov. And on there, there's one of the links in there is where to find help. And you click on that, and this part of the state, that's all the Jackson Purchase plus Livingston County is in Region 1. That's the region I'm responsible for. That'd be the easiest way to get in touch with me. And everybody in the service nowadays has an email address. My email address is on that site, and they can just click on that and send me an email. And in fact, several people do. I've conversed via email with several veterans, our soldiers and sailors, Marines, airmen who are getting ready to get out, and arrange for appointments with them.
Does the service members, do they tell the guys that are about ready to be discharged that there's a service officer out there that you need to contact or you need to get in touch with, or do they give
at the major installations, that usually happens pretty well. In fact, at the major installations, they've got a program with the acronym or the letters BDD. And what they're doing here, this is a benefits delivery thing to where individual who thinks they've got an issue that could be a service-connected disability, they actually help them submit the paperwork to file for this for the VA. They can get everything submitted prior to their EAS, and then, but the VA really won't take action on it until the day they are separated.
What is the EAS, Ron?
Excuse me, yeah, EAS is a expiration of active service, and some of the branches calls it expiration of obligated service. It's the date that they leave active duty. And for some, there's some disturbance in that because they'll take what's called terminal leave. If they got 15, 20, 25 days of leave on the books, some of them even have as much as 120 days of leave on the books. They can actually go on end of tour leave and go home and be at home and still be on active duty. And many folks feel like that, you know, they're off active duty now, but really they're not until that day of their expiration of their active service comes up.
Oh, what was that DD that you were talking about? One of the forms, or?
Well, the DD 214.
Okay.
It's DD stands for Department of Defense, and it's form number 214, and it's the release from active service. It's not a discharge, it's a release from active service. A discharge is when you are no longer have a commitment to, or obligated commitment to the services. Individuals who join services today have a total of 8-year commitment. And so many of them will have a 4-year active duty obligation, and when they leave active duty, they get an additional 4 years still in the individual ready reserves. That means they don't have to drill. So they get this relief from active service. Then when their total obligation is up at the end of the 8 years, that's when they actually get their discharge. So
the command that they're being discharged from will supply them with the DD 214?
They will on the last day of their active duty service.
How important is this document, Ron?
This is probably the most important document they'll ever have related to their military service. This is what is used to verify the fact that they were on active duty and what their characterization of service was. And I'd like to address this characterization of service. The Department of Defense has 5 different characterizations of service. They have the honorable discharge, the honorable character of service. They have an under honorable conditions characterization, under other than honorable conditions, a bad conduct, and a dishonorable conduct. The Department of Defense only has 2 characterizations of service. It's either honorable or dishonorable. And to take a look at the DOD characterizations, the honorable and under honorable conditions by the VA is viewed as honorable service. The other three from the Department of Defense is viewed as the VA as being dishonorable service. Even though they don't have a dishonorable discharge, if they have an other than honorable conditions, a bad conduct discharge, and of course the dishonorable discharge for VA purposes is a dishonorable service.
Well, if I've been out a few years from the military and I lose my DD-214, how can I get another one of those?
A few years ago, it had been very simple. There's only one place you'd have to go to, and that'd be the Military Personnel Records Center, which is part of the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. In the last few years, there's been some diversification of that. But still, if you go on the website for the National Archives and Records Administration, you can request it, and if it's not located with their organization in St. Louis, they will send it to the appropriate organization.
Well, that's good. So this is the most important document that a service member could have.
It is.
Now, when I come to see you after I get discharged, I have to bring my DD-214 with me. And what kind of determinations can you make from that DD-214 at that point?
Well, first off, the members, there's about 6 copies of the DD-214 that's generated when the member separates. The lead one, or the top one, is page number 1. It's got member-1 written on it. That one gives all the information about the dates of service and awards it received, education that they had while they was in service, and the likes of that. It identifies the person and their service, but it does not give a characterization of their service. They also issued one on page 4, which is called a Member 4. And the Member 4 at the bottom of it has additional information, which includes the character of service. And it talks about reenlistment codes and separation codes. These are the codes that are needed to determine what benefits will be or will not be available through the VA. The Member 1 copy really has not much service to anybody who's talking about wanting to help a veteran get benefits from the VA. What is needed always is the Member 4. And that talks about the duration of service, which is very important because when September of 1980, you have to have 24 months of active service to be eligible to enroll in VA health care. But everything's got a caveat to it. But there also has a caveat to it that if you serve for your obligated amount of time, like I recently worked with a young veteran who only had 24 months of active duty. But they were in the reserves, they were called to active duty for a period of 24 months and were released. And because they served the period of time that they were obligated for, even though it was less than 24 months, they're still eligible for VA health care. Also, the duration of service, the dates of service, which tells whether or not they're wartime service or peacetime service, because some benefits are driven by wartime service, and the characterization of that service.
What if I've been a bad boy while I was in the service and got into a scrape or two here, and I come out with the DD-214 that just doesn't look good enough to take advantage of the benefits available? Is there any way I can get that changed?
It's tough. Is there a way? Yes. What's the frequency of it changing? It's very rare, but it does happen. I have seen individuals who have had their characterization of service upgraded. They will never upgrade it to an honorable. If you've got an under honorable conditions, or what they used to call a general discharge, they will not upgrade that to honorable for any reason. If you've got an undesirable, what's now called the other than honorable conditions discharge or bad conduct discharge, or the likes, it can be considered. And there have been cases where they have been approved. It takes the filing with the either the Bureau of Corrections and Naval Records or the Bureau of Corrections military records to get that done. There's a Department of Defense form, a DD form 149 that you use to do that. It's going to take quite a bit of substantiation to cause that to happen.
I know I hear a lot of veterans talking about the fire in St. Louis. What exactly was burned up there?
In 1973, there was a fire at the National Personnel Records Center that destroyed the top floor of the building. It destroyed records for all the soldiers who served from about 1919 through December the 31st of 1959, and some Air Force records who served all the way from the creation of the Air Force in 47 to 1964, if I remember correctly. It destroyed some 16 to 18 million. Almost all the Army records that were there were burned. This was the personnel file in their individual health record. That means they're outpatient treatment records, but their inpatient treatment records are kept at a different location, and none of those records were destroyed. Some of those records, I've actually have received copies of them that are charred around the edges. You can tell it's a piece of burned paper. So just because somebody says they were destroyed doesn't mean you shouldn't ask anyway, because there are some of them still available. It's rare, it's the exception, but they're there. The Marine Corps and the Navy records were not involved in that fire at all. Even though the fire was in '73, if you were released from active duty on January the 1st of '60 and later, your records were not even involved in the fire. And there's a lot of veterans out there running around who've been told that their records who were destroyed, even though they got out of service in '60, '61, '62, even in '73, they're been told they were destroyed. They're not destroyed.
Speaking of that, do you have fraud in the system? Like, do you have people maybe that weren't even in the military typing up their own DD-214 and really trying to scam the system?
Yes, there are, and that's the reason that we always look for a certified, see the original document or a certified copy of an original document. I've known of a case where an individual actually was used his deceased brother's DD-214 to try to get benefits under his brother's name. It's there. It does happen. It's not common, but it does happen, so we have to be on the lookout for it.
Well, the reason I ask, I just finished reading a book about stolen valor, and it's about the wannabes that try to play the system, but do you think the VA system is secure enough that that's almost impossible to do?
I'm sure that there's some that are in the system that don't rate to be in the system, because as large as the system is, it's going to happen from time to time. They generally get found out, and it goes from there. The whole gist of the system, though, is to prevent that from happening.
Do you have any idea when the VA started? I mean, when somebody just sat down and said, we need to take care of our veterans that are returning from overseas or wherever. Do you have any idea when that started?
Actually, it goes back to the American Civil War.
Does it?
Not the VA as we know it today, but the benefit, pensions for soldiers of war. Lincoln was very outspoken about it during and at the end of the Civil War. The creation of the VA as we know it today comes about more so at the end of World War I, basically with the Veterans March on the Capitol. If you've ever read anything about that.
I've seen it on newsreels and things, and what was their main protest? Is it just a lack of care?
They were promised a pension, basically a mustering out pay, as I recall, that wasn't sent to them. And the financial times were tough then, more so than what they are right now, and the veterans just basically banded together and marched on Washington, D.C. and camped on the mall.
Ron, what about the funding of the VA? I hear a lot about that the funding is just not always there when it's needed by the VA. Can you explain a little bit about the funding process?
I'm not really involved in that. I know I've looked some at it just out of personal interest, but the VA is just another department of our federal government, and it has different branches. There's the Veterans Health Administration, which most people see is the health care side. There's the Veterans Benefit Administration, which administers the pensions and the compensation for service-connected disabilities, and administers the education programs, the flags for the bearing of veterans, and grave markers is also the Veterans Benefit Administration. And then there's the National Cemetery Authority that handles the national cemeteries. Each one of these, even though the VA gets a total budget, each one of these branches' budget is also put in there. It's not the VA itself that determines what each one of these branches gets. It comes more from Congress, and the funding of it is just that. It comes from the Congress. Whatever the president submits for his budget and what the legislature approves is what they end up getting. There's been some people who wanted the Veterans Health Administration's budget not to be just a lump sum dollar, but them to say how many veterans they're treating, and per veteran they get a certain amount of money for the Health Administration. And of course, there's pros and cons to that. Yeah. But yeah, it's an ongoing thing. It's just part of all the total funding and the budgeting of our federal government.
Ron, let's take a break, and we'll be right back with you after this. like to welcome you back to the Veteran Voice. Today we're talking to Ron McClure about benefits and the VA system and how to file claims. Ron, I got out of the military and I've come to see you. I've got my DD-214, but some things happened in the military that I can't figure out. I know that I spent 32 days on the USS Repose, which was a hospital ship. I have no knowledge of going out there. I do have knowledge of being there for one day, but I spent 32 days on the ship. Can you help me in any way?
We can. I'm assuming you're talking about you'd like to have some records showing that you were there.
Right.
Your personnel file, that's a transfer from one organization to another. You go from one status of whatever your billet MOS was to your billet is being that of being a patient, and that causes an entry to be made in your personnel file. So you can request a copy of your personnel file, and in there to show the date that you were transferred to the Repose, the date you left the Repose. Then we can also, knowing those dates, then we can request the actual inpatient records of your stay on the Repose.
If I was on there should be a record.
There is a record.
There is a record. Well, that's good. And I do remember when I came back from Vietnam that there were some problems. And I don't know if I was entitled to compensation or not. What would I have to tell you, or what would I have to have on records to indicate that the VA could help me?
The first thing is needed is your DD-214, right, because there's three things you've got to show the VA to be granted. Now, I'm talking about getting a service-connected disability. To be granted a service-connected disability, there's three things you've got to show the VA. First, that you have a period of qualifying duty. And that's where we need that certified copy of the original, the DD-214, or for the World War II era veterans, there's discharge papers. They received actual discharge papers at the end of the war, and the showing your character of service. And then you got to have a current diagnosis of something wrong with you. It's hard to be granted a disability for something that hasn't been diagnosed.
Right.
Then the third thing is you have to show a connection between that current diagnosis of something wrong with you and to that period of qualifying duty. We've got to say you got an issue where you got arthritis in your elbow and you want to file for that to be a service-connected disability. We've got to show that something happened to the elbow while you was on active duty with honorable service under VA definitions for that to be service-connected and receive compensation from the VA.
Now, do I have to be looked at by a VA doctor? Can I go to my own personal physician to check out this problem I think I have?
The diagnosis can come from anywhere. During the process of the application and verifying the application to grant the benefit, most times the veteran will be sent for a compensation and pension exam. At that examination, they're just to confirm that the diagnosis is there and how severe is the diagnosis. But the diagnosis alone does not give you a percentage of disability, it's just how severe it is. And also at the compensation and pension exam, they will address the issue as what's their opinion of it being related to the incident that happened in service. They will give an opinion stating whether or not they feel it is related to that incident in service. So yeah, you don't have to be diagnosed by a VA provider, but in the process you will be seen about 99% of the time by a VA provider just to make those determinations.
Who would give this examination? Is there a special department within the VA that handles this?
Well, the VA, the Veterans Health Administration, which is the VA Medical Centers, does that for the Veterans Benefit Administration. And at the VA Medical Center, they got for general medicine, they just call it the CNP clinic, and they do CNP examinations. But if you get into special issues such as orthopedics, or if you get into audiology, if you get into internal medicine, then you actually will go to that particular clinic that the VA has to be seen by a specialist in that area.
Now, what is a CNP?
CNP is compensation and pension examination.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Marion or some other facility, and I'm going to be looked at by the specialist in charge of whatever's wrong with me, and they're going to determine that I've got a major problem here. Now, they're not sure whether this problem came from Vietnam or if it came from civilian life or what. They're not sure about that, but they do know the problem exists and it's a major problem. Do they take all of these factors into consideration when they issue a report?
They do, but before I answer your question, let's talk about major.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be a major problem. It has to be a chronic issue. In medicine, you talk about acute issues and chronic issues. An acute issue is you have something wrong with you, you treat it, it goes away, it's not an issue anymore. A chronic issue is you've got something wrong with you, you treat it, it may get better, it may not, it may stabilize, but it's going to always be there. An example is you get an abrasion on your arm or your hand or something, and you treat it and it heals up and there's no scar there. That's acute. Let's say though you get an injury and it's pretty substantial enough that when it heals it leaves a scar. That scar is considered chronic. Now most scars with the VA will be service connected at 0%, but there are some of them that are rated at 10% depending on where they're located on the body or how large they are. And then if they're extremely cover large portions of the body, their ratings would be higher than 10%. So it's not whether or not it's a major issue, it can be a very minor issue, and as long as it's chronic. Because the VA disability is not like Social Security, to where in Social Security you're either disabled or you're not. The VA rates you in percentages from 0 to 100%.
So is that in 10% increments?
Yes, it's in 10% increments that they pay. You actually, if you have multiple conditions, you may have a 39.2% rating, and they'll pay you at the 40% because they round it to the nearest 10th. 10%. And then that disability is just saying that for the average person in the workforce, because of this, they're making a certain amount of money less. And that's there's a scale you go to look at what percentage, this 10% pays this amount, 20% pays another amount, etc. And so it doesn't have to be a major issue at all. And it doesn't have to mean that you can't go work. Even if a veteran is 100% service connected by the VA, they can still have employment, and the benefit that they draw from VA will not be impacted by that. The VA just says that the average person would be making this much money more if they didn't have this disability.
What's the maximum that a veteran could make?
Well, you know, there's some special monthly compensations that come into play. 100% service-connected disabled veteran with their spouse is going to get about $2,600 a month from the VA. But if he's got a special monthly compensation, a K, which it happens quite often, that's another $96 a month they get. But an individual who's got an amputated arm, a hand, a foot, a leg, there's special monthly compensation for that. So the maximum amount, there's people out there actually drawing over $6,000 a month.
Wow.
They are definitely the exception. And I don't know of any individual who's drawing special monthly compensation who's really thrilled about getting that additional money. They would rather not have the disability. But when the doctors review that at the clinic, the doctors make a review and make a report to the Veterans Benefit Administration. In our case here in Kentucky, it's out of Louisville. And the individuals in Louisville at the Veterans Benefit Administration make the final decision as to whether or not it's service-connected, and make the final decision as whether or not it's a 10, 20, 30, whatever % disability. Now this is not an arbitrary opinion from the Veterans Benefit Administration. They have a manual that they go to that when they look at if your conditions fall within certain ranges, then this is the percentage you get.
Well, what if my C&P comes back or we go ahead and file for disability and they come back with, say, 10%? Well, I disagree with that tremendously. I think it's way higher than that. Do I have a way to appeal that decision?
Anything can always be appealed, but to appeal, you need to have some hope of having it granted. There needs to be some justification for it. I've got access to the manual that grants the percentages. I break that out and we go over what the characteristics are for 10% or what the next higher level might be. And if the veteran tells me, yes, I can get the evidence to show I meet this higher evidence, then we will go back in either for a reconsideration or an appeal.
Right. So so you don't really make much decisions when you and I sit down to talk about my claim, other than to get me with the right paperwork and get it off to the right places and all that.
Absolutely. My job, I'm a go-between. I do this every day, so the forms aren't strange to me, the language isn't strange to me. For somebody who's not been involved with it before, it can be overwhelming, as you well know.
Yes, I do.
And even days I just don't know what I'm doing, and I'll pick up the phone and I'll make that call to somebody where I can get an answer. Yeah. When I get an answer that says, well, I think, I don't take that as the answer. I want to know what it says and what it is that somebody knows, not what they think.
Well, Ron, is there anything else you'd like to add today about the system, or anything at all, something new maybe that's popped up?
Not so much something new, but every veteran situation is different. One day difference in service can make a difference in benefits that are available. Just because a neighbor or a friend or a relative is getting or not getting a benefit doesn't mean that you can either get or not get that benefit yourself. Anybody who serves, has got issues that they feel is connected to their time that they were in service, they should be filing for a service-connected disability. The thing is, you've got to have those three things I talked about initially. You've got to be able to show a period of qualifying duty. You've got to show that there's a current diagnosis of something wrong with you. Then show that connection between that current diagnosis and that period of duty.
How can we find you?
I work out of Mayfield primarily as my home office, but I also work at the clinic there that the VA has, and also at the clinic here in Paducah. I'm at the clinic in Paducah on Mondays and on Thursdays. I'm at the clinic in Mayfield on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. It's best always to make an appointment to see me because I'm covered up, really. Right. In Paducah, to get an appointment at the clinic, the best thing to do is just to visit that clinic. You can call on the phone, but inevitably you get it rolls over to Marion, Illinois, and you just don't get through. So visiting the clinic there to schedule an appointment Monday through Friday from 8 to 4:30 would be great. The clinic in Mayfield is a new open. It's only been open about a month and a half. It's not that swamped yet. You can dial there at 270-247-2455, and they've got my appointment calendar there, and they can schedule an appointment. Okay. But the appointment is the best way to go to, and getting to the clinic and scheduling from there. I do work for the state of Kentucky. If you're from Illinois or Tennessee, it's going to be best for you to contact a service officer from your state to work with you.
Okay. Well, Ron, let's take a break. We'll be right back. Well, Ron, I was wondering if you could give us an overview.
Well, Mike, I think when you talk about an overview there, we're talking about the benefits that the veterans look for. The first benefit most of the time we're talking about when you come in to see me is to enroll in the VA healthcare system. The veterans in this area, the viewing area here, they can either go to actually a veteran can choose what facility they want to use as far as the medical centers. Then the medical centers have clinics. The clinic here in Paducah is referred to as a community-based outpatient clinic, just like the one in Mayfield is. That is, each of those are part of the VAMC or VA Medical Center out of Marion, Illinois. There's also in this area veterans who go to the VAMC in Nashville, Tennessee. If the veteran can choose which one they want to go to. But if you're going to use the clinics in Mayfield or Paducah, you've got to be enrolled at the Medical Center in Marion. If you're going to use the clinics down in Clarksville, Dover, Tennessee, you've got to be enrolled in the Medical Center in Nashville. But that Marion is the easiest, probably the easiest medical center in the country to get enrolled in through the process that they use. Veterans who come see me, we fill out a questionnaire with them, then I get on the phone, I telephone the medical center, and most of the time, if they're not too busy with other people sitting in front of them, they allow me to talk to them over the phone and give them the information. Then they mail the veterans the information that the computer prints out for them to sign. Also at the same time, we normally get them set up for an intake appointment. All intake appointments are done at Marion, and then whatever clinic they're assigned to is where their follow-on care would be. If the clinic is full and there's not eligible to have additional people there, they may find that for the first 3 months, 6 months, whatever, they may have to go back to Marion.
Ron, is the intake sort of like an emergency room, or
not at all?
Is it two separate things?
Yeah, it's two separate things altogether. And what I tell the veterans is, it's an induction physical, but it's a whole lot nicer. It's not a bunch of guys and gals running around in the examining station. It's a one-on-one between a veteran and a nurse for about 20 to 30 minutes, then a veteran and a doctor for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then if they desire to have, if the VA is desiring for them to have some lab work or an x-ray, they send them to those particular locations there at Marion, and that's why it has to be at Marion, because of those facilities are readily available there.
Yeah. So this is more of an information gathering time.
It's more of an information, this is, you know, here we are the VA, but more so, here I am the veteran, and this is where my health situation is today. And then if there's any following things that need to be done at that time, then they start scheduling appointments for such things as going to get hearing test because you got bad hearing, you've got some kidney problems, so you can go to the doctor who takes care of kidneys and the likes of this. But once you get in the system, if you use the system once every 2 years, you're considered in the system. If you don't use the system for a 2-year period of time, you're basically disenrolled. They know that you were there, but you're not active in the system. And so I always encourage veterans to get at least a biannual, if not an annual physical, and keep themselves active in the system. Many of the veterans who want to enroll in the VA healthcare system really want to use it as a pharmacy. And that's okay with the VA, but you've got to follow their rules to be able to do it. And I don't want to get into that here today because of some other things I want to cover. The next issue veterans really want to look at is filing for these service-connected disabilities. There's service-connected and non-service-connected disabilities. And there's benefits for veterans, and there's benefits for the survivors of veterans. Let's talk about the veterans first. And first, let's go back to the service-connected disabilities. We covered that where you got to show the 3 elements to get a claim approved. If a claim is denied, and one thing a veteran needs to remember, a 0% service-connected disability is not a denial, it has been service-connected. It's just that it's not severe enough yet to be granted as a 10%. Any service-connected veteran who has a disability that gets worse should look at it and consider possibly for filing for a rating increase on it. And that's a very simple process compared to the initial or original claim. So that's for any veteran who's been on active duty for any amount of time, who has something happen to them while they're on active duty, and that's still an issue today, is what you file a service-connected disability for.
So this doesn't have to be wartime. This can be
for service-connected disabilities, it doesn't have to be wartime. You don't have to have been on active duty for 24 months after 1980, there are some periods it's 180 days, periods it's 90 days. That's just for getting enrolled in the healthcare system. But for service-connected disability compensation, if you're getting off the bus at recruit training, you just got on active duty, and you stumbled and fell and you cracked your knee, and that knee is still a problem today, and you got released from active duty because of that 10 days later, you can file for that to be a service-connected disability. Duration of active duty is not an issue on that. It's character of service. The event began on active duty. There's another type of compensation for issues that pre-existed service. If it pre-existed service, but the service aggravated it beyond normal limits, you can file for that to be service-connected and get it granted. It's tougher, though, because we've got to show that aggravation. I've worked with a veteran who had a heart condition going on to active duty, and he still has a heart condition today, and it's much more severe. And we were able to show that, and because it was pre-existing, they reduced his rating on that by 10% because of the pre-existing. But it is service-connected for the aggravation, is the term that the VA will use. Now, for compensation is paid for compensation is paid for service-connected issues. The VA also has for veterans pension. And pension is only available for the veterans of wartime service. And I did not say combat service. I said wartime service. There's dates designated by Congress that makes it wartime. If you serve 1 day during a period of wartime and at least 90 days on active duty total, with 1 day being wartime, you have low income and minimum assets. It's not really minimum in some cases, depending on age again. Then you're eligible possibly for this non-service connected disability pension. I've got a veteran who was a Vietnam era veteran. He had a heart attack not long after he got out of service. He's not been able to work since then because of his heart condition. He's drawing this wartime veterans pension. And it's not like the compensation fact. It's not paid in percentages. It's based on income, the thing they call accountable income. I really don't want to get into accountable income right now, but it's something we work with based on what your actual income is and what you pay out of pocket for health care and certain other expenses. Then for the families of veterans, of the survivors of veterans, now let me go back to the compensation pension both. A family member, while the veteran is living, does not draw financial benefits from the VA. The veteran will draw additional benefits possibly because that veteran has dependents, but the dependent does not get the money. For the survivors of veterans, if the veteran's death is from a service-connected issue, then there's a program called Dependency and Indemnity Compensation. That's a real long word. We usually just say DIC. On the DIC, if you can show a veteran's death was caused, or if the veteran died on active duty, or the veteran's death was caused by something from active duty, then the DIC can be paid. It's regardless of any other income or any assets that you have. And one interesting case, I say interesting to me, it was just sort of shocked me. I was working with this lady for 18 months trying to get her involved in this next program I'm going to talk about. And into it when we couldn't get it. Her income was just like $10 a month too high. And out of the blue one day she said, well, I should be able to get something. My first husband died in World War II. For 18 months we've been struggling to try to get her some minimal benefits. And here all of a sudden she just opened the door, because if there's been subsequent marriages, this DIC does not go away unless the marriage happens before age 57. If the marriage is terminated after age 57 or terminates ever for any reason, then this DIC benefit becomes back available again. If the marriage is after age 57, it doesn't matter, the benefit does not go away. Then for the widows of wartime veterans, this here again are the dependents of wartime veterans. And this is strictly, again, that definition of wartime. If they have a limited income and assets, then they can file for a an improved death pension. And this improved death pension is based on, again, the income and assets, income being what they call countable income, which is their gross income minus health care expenses, and then their assets, and the amount of assets depends upon your age. They can file and be granted this improved death pension. The improved death pension requires an annual report of medical expenses to be submitted, because they use that each year to determine what your benefit is for that year.
Is your income level, is that contingent upon whether you pay a full price for pharmacy products?
When you get into the healthcare system and what they have is co-pays, whether it be for the pharmacy or seeing a general practitioner or seeing a specialist, if you are not service connected and you're enrolled in the system, then it's income dependent. There's one level where you don't pay for anything. There's no co-pays at all. And then there's a level where you pay $8 per prescription per 30-day supply, but you do not pay for any other health care. Then there's another level to where you pay for the $8 for the prescriptions, then you pay $15 to see a general practitioner, and then you pay $50 to see a specialist. And you pay $10 a day for hospitalization stay, unless you're on Medicare. Then you get into the Medicare deductible, and co-pays on Medicare gets involved with it. If you're service connected between 0 and through 40%, those co-pays apply for issues that are not service connected. In other words, the VA will treat you for service connected issues at no cost. But between 0 and 40%, if you have non-service connected issues you're being treated for, your income will drive whether or not you make co-pays. Once the veteran's service connected disabilities are rated at 50% or higher, they do not pay for any care that they receive from the VA healthcare system.
Can you go over 100%?
You cannot go over 100%, because the way that they figure the percentages when you have multiple issues is if you are 40% disabled, then you're 60% able. And if you get an additional disability of 30%, they take 30% of that 60%, which would be 18. So now you're going to be 58% disabled, which I mentioned before in the earlier session, that you could have something other than 10%, but they're going to round that 58% to 60%. But this special monthly compensation I mentioned the last time, it shows that for different disabilities, you can draw on a special monthly compensation. And like I said, there are veterans out there drawing in excess of $6,000 a month. You don't want to be one of those veterans.
Right. The price they have to pay for it is not worth it.
But if a veteran has one issue that is 100% service connected and has other issues that will combine to 60%, they automatically are placed on one of those special monthly compensations to give them additional money.
Ron, I always had a problem figuring out the priority system. Again, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I've heard people tell me about priority 8. Could you explain just a little bit difference?
Well, without getting the manual out and looking at it to refresh my memory, priority 1 is a veteran who is 50% or higher service-connected disabled. And then you got priority 2 is those who are 30 and 40%. Then priority 3 is those who are 10 and 20%. Then there's a priority for those who have a Purple Heart, whether they have a service-connected disability or not. Then there's some other priorities in there for individuals based on their income.
There's POW too, I believe.
Right.
They have it.
Some particular issues will automatically put you in a particular priority. The priority aid has different levels in it. There's an A, B, C, D, and E. What it is hear most about this priority aid is an individual who is grandfathered in the system. On January the 16th of 2003, the Veterans Health Administration decided that they couldn't have enough income. You talked about the budget a while ago. They didn't have enough budget to provide health care for all the veterans that were seeking assistance. The VA healthcare system was growing in excess of 25% per year in the number of veterans that they were seeing. And the decision, it was not a legislative decision, but it was a policy decision that the VA was allowed to make, and they've always been allowed to make this type of decision, that they decided that some veterans, they would not enroll in the system. And this is where the income issue comes in. For non-service connected disability, first, non-service connected and 0% service connected disabled veterans, if their income was over certain limits, depending on the number of dependents that they have, they would not be allowed to receive treatment in the VA. There's an exception to this for Vietnam veterans. Any Vietnam veteran is allowed to be enrolled in the VA healthcare system regardless of their income. Their income would drive what kind of co-pays that they make.
So everything, the whole VA system is broken down to percentages, priorities, but what generation of veterans has caused the greatest influx in the past 3 or 4 years? Has there been anything that has caused the VA services to spike at a level?
I've actually been in some briefings where they talked about the number of veterans that they anticipate taking care of in the future. And this is just, this drives their plans for,
Right.
capital construction and the likes of that. And it's actually supposed to peak in about 2015 and then level off for a while and then drop. Our World War II veterans are dying at the veteran, I forget the rate now, but it's like 1,000 a month,
Yeah.
maybe 1,000 a day. I mean, it's a huge number of them are passing away. But the Vietnam era veterans are getting more of them are enrolling simply because they're hitting 65 years of age and their life situation is changing. It's an issue that they want to take a look at using the VA. Only about 30% of veterans ever use the VA for anything, and that's amazing to me that that percentage is so low. It really is. It's throughout the nation. Only about 30% of veterans ever go to the VA for any issue at all.
Yeah, because with the economy, especially like it is today, it seems the reasonable thing to do is get into the VA healthcare system.
And a lot of folks I work with, their situation is not such that they feel like they necessarily need it today, but they're afraid that down the road they might need it. Like this General Motors. I've talked with some individuals who've retired from General Motors and they're concerned that they're going to lose their health care benefits. And they want to just in case, they like to have that as a backup.
Well, 30% of veterans using the VA facilities, that's just incredible. I agree with you. Is there any particular reason for that, do you think?
It's a combination of things. From when I hear talking with the veterans who come in, the older ones will say, I've never used the VA for anything. I've been able to take care of myself. And I know there's guys out there who are much worse off than I am, and they feel like it's not right for them to use it. But then they feel like they've been pressured into a situation where they need to take a look at it.
Well, Ron, let's take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking to Mr. Ron McClure today, a service officer here in Western Kentucky, and he's going to be explaining some of the benefits and some of the workings of the VA system. Ron?
One thing I'd like to bring up is I hear veterans make the comment that they're just waiting for us to die or they don't want to give it to me. I tend to disagree with that. Many of the VA employees are veterans themselves, and the thing about it is, they get audited like anybody else. They got to have the evidence in front of them before they can say yes. And I can see getting upset and saying, well, I thought I submitted them evidence for this, for evidence for that. Whatever the VA asks for, get it together and present it to them so that they can say yes. The reason they're asking for it is so that they can say yes. Not so that they can deny anything, but so that they can say yes. Because they cannot say yes unless they have the appropriate evidence in front of them. And that's really a lot of what I do. And I work for the Kentucky Department of Veterans Affairs, and we're scattered all over the state. And there's a service officer, there's 18 of us out here in the field. And get up with a service officer for either with the Kentucky Department of Veterans Affairs or the American Legion or the VFW or the Military Order of the Purple Heart, the American or AMVETS. There are many of them out there. And ask them for assistance. Because like I said earlier on, we do this every day. And because we do it every day, the forms aren't strange to us. And we can assist you in getting those forms put together, knowing which forms to pull out, what to say on them, and getting them back to the VA.
But isn't griping about the VA sort of like when we were in the military and we griped about the food all day?
Oh yeah. I mean,
you know,
we're going to gripe. People are going to, because it's
right.
frustrating. And when you get frustrated, you have a tendency that you're going to gripe, you're going to complain.
But I can honestly say my experience with the VA has been nothing but positive.
Well, I've run across some cases. I worked with one veteran who was a World War II veteran. He'd been fighting for this particular service-connected disability ever since he got out of service. And it was granted to him 1 month before he passed away, after I took my this employment, which was in 2002. So it was about 2004, 2005 when it was issued to him, or granted to him. It was based on a piece of paper that they had not looked at all these years. And we finally was able to get him in front of an appeal again, and the individual looked at it and says, yes, this verifies it. I've got another veteran who was released from the Navy back in the 60s for a medical condition that at that time he filed for it to be service-connected, and they said no. And the reason his was separated was because of it, and the VA said, well, it's not going to be chronic, and so they didn't grant it. But they granted it to him now, and so we're working with him and appealing to go back to get that. Not only it's been service-connected now, but to get him to go back with an effective date back in the early 60s when he got out of the Navy. There are cases like this to where but the issue is getting the right information in front of the people in the form that they need to see it to get them to say yes.
So for service-connected injury, there's really no dates. I mean, there's no time limit to file. Is that correct?
That's correct. One type of service-connected disabilities we haven't talked about is issues that are considered to be presumptive. In other words, the fact that you were on active duty and that you served in a particular location or you did a certain thing and you have a specific diagnosis, then you got to show you have the diagnosis, that you served at what they're talking about there, and then they would just grant it based on that right there without a whole lot of additional evidence. There's a new one out there that a lot of people may not know about, and that's Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS. Anybody who has ever served on active duty for 90 days or more, regardless of branch of service, regardless if they're male or female, regardless if their duty was predominantly in the continental United States or if their duty was predominantly overseas, they're 3 times as likely to be diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease as anybody else. And then we can file for that to be a service-connected disability as a presumptive case.
Ron, I was scanning through some of the literature today, and I noticed they've included sexual trauma. Is this due to the influx of women in the armed forces? And explain a little bit about that. What you're talking about here is post-traumatic stress disorder from an event of sexual trauma. I see.
It's a different, and it's the same. Post-traumatic stress is post-traumatic stress.
Right.
But what caused it? Most sexual trauma, it's hard to come out with good, strong evidence and say this shows sexual trauma happened. Because it goes unreported for years usually, and often there's no way to go back and actually, you know, a police record does not exist on it. There's no documentation that it happened at that time in many cases. So it takes a different type of presentation to get this approved. Now, whether it's really not new any more than what the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder is new. You know, in previous wars it's been called shell shock, it's been called battle fatigue. It's all the same thing.
Well, it's good that the VA's taken a proactive stance in regards to that issue, because I'm sure that helps young women to join the military because they know they'll be protected.
Indeed, it's not just for the women. There's the men who've been victims of sexual assault too, and you know it's tough to talk about.
Right.
And these individuals do need to go to a mental health care provider. They need to talk with them about it, and they need to have the diagnosis made, because there again, Without the diagnosis, it's not going to be granted.
Well, Ron, there's been an uptick in suicides lately. The figures are just horrendous. Can you explain why this might be?
Wow, you're asking me to be a mental health professional now. One of the figures that you see on it, and there is an increase in total numbers, but the percentage numbers you're seeing, they're talking about the percentage of those seen by the VA, and it sounds like it's a percentage of all veterans. But remember, we said before, only about 30% of all veterans are being seen by the VA. So the figure is not as drastic, but don't let me minimize it. Suicide is very, what's the word? It just destroys people. It's not just the individual who's taken their life, but it destroys the family and friends. Yeah, when I was on active duty, I had some issues. Sometimes when individuals in my outfits or nearby outfits were, victims of self-harm, and it's very devastating to everybody around them. Uptick. One thing is, I think it's more closely watched. It's more closely reported. In the past, I think there's been incidences of individuals took their own life, but they made it look like an accident, that where it didn't actually show as being self-inflicted.
But this is something that's happened in all wars, so I'm sure back during the Civil War, Revolutionary War, there were probably instances of this happening also.
Humans are humans. It doesn't matter what era you're in. There's certain things that just don't change.
Ron, tell me a little bit about your service. I've known you quite a while, but I know you're a Marine.
Out of high school, I went through college on the Navy ROTC program and took a commission in the Marine Corps, and I served 20 years in the Marine Corps. Even though I was in there from 71 to 91, I never saw any combat, which sort of surprises me. I saw my last major units pull out of Vietnam, last major Marine units pull out of Vietnam in 71, 72 when I was going through my initial training. I do have some contemporaries who did go to Vietnam, but there was very few of us that did. I had contemporaries who were involved in Beirut in 73 and the likes of that. I sat on the with Air Alert and with the standby forces for the evacuation of Cambodia, Phnom Penh, and for the Saigon Embassy. My unit just wasn't one of the units that was used for it. I spent the 20 years in, enjoyed my time in the Marine Corps, I retired and came back to Western Kentucky.
Well, I would say you're making up for a lot of that now by your work and what you do. I know you've been a friend to a lot of veterans and helped so many veterans, and we'll never know the number for sure, but I think I speak for all veterans when I say thank you for your service, first of all, and thank you for the work that you do, because it's a lot of people would be doing without if it not be for the service officers.
Well, Mike, I enjoy my work. I enjoy helping other folks, and the big issue is just, as I said before, is just helping veterans get the information that they need to put in front of the VA, and the research that has to be done sometimes. We get on the internet. I help people find friends that they had contact with in service. I help one individual from World War II find his company first sergeant from World War II, who lo and behold still had a morning report showing where he went to sick call for a cold weather injury. And that was used to be able to service connect the cold weather injury he has today. The residuals of it. It's rewarding when those things come through. Often though there's most of the cases, things like that don't happen. But when you do enough of it, you see them like that.
Have you had a great number of World War II veterans get into the system? And
yes. I work with as many World War II veterans as I do any era, if not more.
Well, it's good, because for so long they just went to work and kind of kept their mouths shut about it.
And I'd like to sort of put up an appeal out there for the World War II veterans. If they've been dreaming about the war, and as we get older, we have more time on our hands, these things come back to us. If their war memories are getting to be an issue with them, they need to be asking somebody about being seen to see if they've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, and then filing for that to be a service-connected disability.
Why do you think we have a greater instance of PTSD today?
We don't have a greater incidence. We have a greater awareness, and it's because it's first off, mental health has become a long way as being recognized as an actual disease rather than a weakness in someone. It's not a weakness. Like I tell most veterans who've been diagnosed with PTSD, for what they went through, if they did not have PTSD, they wouldn't be normal. A normal person who goes through that and has not had that kind of impact on their life, I would say they're not normal.
Right. Is there any final comments you'd like to make, Ron?
I appreciate the veterans and being able to work with them. I enjoy history, and rather than reading history, I get to talk to history every day. And it's a great pleasure to be able to work with the veterans and to be able to help them and their families.
So we would invite all veterans, if they're in need of service of some sort, if they have health problems or problems with PTSD, to get a hold of a service officer right away.
Yes, indeed. And not just myself. We've got the American Legion, we've got the VFW in town who have service officers, AMVETS have service officers. For those individuals outside the state of Kentucky, seek out the service officers in your state, because in Illinois the claims will actually be done in Chicago. Over in Missouri they're going to be done in St. Louis. Down in Tennessee they're done in Nashville. And it's our department I have contacts in Louisville. I don't have contacts in these other states. Right. And they need to work for somebody in their state.
Okay, Ron, thank you so much for being with us today. We've had a good discussion about issues that face all veterans. And join us next time on Veteran Voice as we explore other issues which are very important to the veterans and their family. So long.